So today I'd like to welcome Dr. Ruby Campbell, who's written a very interesting book called Scientists in the Boardroom, Harnessing the Power of STEM Leaders in Every Boardroom. We're going to have a little look at that with Ruby. But before we start, do you just want to tell me something about yourself, kind of what you do and a bit of your background and your journey and the research that you've been involved in?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me along, and I'm delighted to be here, David. Um, yes, the book is Scientist in Every Boardroom, and the emphasis every, as my editor insisted, because as I'll get to in a minute, it's really about ensuring that we have rational thinking in every boardroom. Um, so my background is really mixed. And I started out as a research scientist, research chemist in the pharmaceutical industry. And I moved within the corporate world for a span of about 27 years um, in different roles, all within technical and scientific affairs. Although I had a 3-year stint in business development, um, I I've been very lucky. I got to work on some really fascinating projects, most of them greenfield projects, which is what I love. And I got to set up the first center of excellence here in Australasia for a multinational pharmaceutical company, which earned me the privilege of being transferred to the US. So I ended up, I was there for 3 years,
Mm.
and I set up, and this is in the early 1990s, I set up the contract manufacturing business for a multinational pharma out of two facilities, one in New York and the other one in Puerto Rico, and that was a lot of fun. Then I came back to Australia, and I again ended up working on a really fascinating project with a startup biotech company, an Australian company, and I was part of the executive team that went through the IPO process and got it listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. I set up the technical operations division, a lot of fun. And then I went back to the multinational world, if you like, and headed up scientific affairs for Australasia. Um, I ended up then sort of getting very curious about the commercial side of things. Obviously, because of the types of projects I was always working on, which always entailed multiple functions,
Mm.
and I always found myself as the interpreter, if you like, sort of both sides, speaking to the commercial folk and then the scientific folk. So I ended up doing an MBA as a mature age student. So it's an executive MBA. And that time was really life changing for me. Um, and I ended up joining the adjunct faculty of the School of Business at the University of New South Wales.
Oh, yeah.
And that was, like I said, life changing. And that got me thinking about, well, really, what's going on with leadership? And as I started to ask myself those questions, it led me then to continue to study some more. And I ended up doing further studies in applied psychology. So I was very privileged to study with the late Professor Anthony Grant, who was the founder of the first coaching psychology unit at the University of Sydney.
Ah.
And so, yeah, a very, very interesting and, windy career, but one that I feel really privileged to have and cherish very much, because I get to work with executives.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering how you'd made that transition from from being a chemist into the coaching world that I know you in, and
Yeah,
interesting. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Brilliant.
good. Yeah.
Okay, so the book, how what was it that kind of brought you to writing the book, and what led up to that?
Look, David, like every big endeavor, whether you're starting up your own company or your own journal, uh, or, or writing a book, it's a product of a lot of experiences, right,
Mm,
and a lot of insights. And so, for me, it was a long journey. It was sort of always questioning, always asking, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. And I think it was that need to make sense of things, you know, as we say in coaching psychology, meaning making.
yeah.
So it was out of a need to make sense
And what
of
specifically wasn't making sense? Was it about the leadership or organizations?
all of the above:
Oh,
leadership, organizations.
yeah.
um, the I've been very lucky to have worked with many organizations. I've also chaired non-for-profit organizations. I've sat on boards. I've worked with the United Nations.
Mm,
I've I started from the bottom in the lab, and isn't it sad that I call it the bottom, but that's what the world calls it.
mm,
Um, and and through that trajectory, I just started to see so many incongruences, and um, I just decided that we just were not really hitting the mark when it comes to developing our leaders. That sounds really arrogant because I'm not claiming that I have all the answers, not
mm.
at all. I'm just building on what other researchers and practitioners have developed and continue to develop. And I thought I had something to contribute.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a difference quite often between the way a scientist thinks and sees the world and people within organizations who don't have a science background kind of view the world, view data, view decision making, and
Yeah.
those kinds of activities. And I get what you're saying, that there's a big difference there between those two kind of worlds, I suppose. And because you were sat in between those two worlds, operating in both sides, I can see why you would start to realize those problems. Brilliant. Okay. So what I find interesting is you actually started out writing a book that was originally about coaching for ethical leadership. So how did that switch happen?
Ah, it's it's some people, a lot of people who are reading the book, they say, how did you know? um, but I think that it was almost like a massive detour. So I was working on ethical leadership, and I then 2016 happened. That's the presidential election in the United States, and I was born in the US, so I'm an American citizen by birth, but I'm an Australian citizen by descent. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, right. I didn't know
And yeah, yeah. So my whole family, my extended family, they're in the US. My sister, nieces, nephews,
that.
um, and so and I still currently hold an American passport. I um
Yeah.
I remember the day after, and I was having lunch with a highly, probably the most referenced psychologist of our time, Professor Richard Ryan, and he from self-determination theory. And he now heads up a research unit at the Australian Catholic University. But back then, he was still at the University of Rochester, New York.
Mm.
And we were having lunch, and I remember how the somber mood. He was heartbroken, and I was more than heartbroken. I was emotional. I was in tears, and we didn't know what was going to happen, but we were just commiserating. And as I continued to research and to work and to watch what was happening, and writing, I could see this very palpable antagonism against science.
Ah.
And he started to undo a lot of the work that had taken decades to implement to protect the environment, and change many other regulations, and without getting into politics. Although, as I mentioned in the book, it is wrong for scientists not to get involved in politics. It's high time that scientists did get involved, as Albert Einstein said. And so it was an aha moment, to be honest, David. It was also, as I started to read more about the alarming lack of action with regards to climate change, and I am now speaking about Australia. And I just started to feel like I could no longer be an observer. And even though I'm a coach, and you would think, well, you are doing something, you are contributing, you are coaching leaders. Clearly, as a coach, you cannot influence your clients on your own values and your own views. You're supposed to respect, their values and their action, their goals.
Mm.
And so I thought, well, there is something else I can do. I can apply my research skills and my writing skills to and also as I kept researching, and the Oxford Review helped me tremendously to identify a pattern in terms of who was being promoted to CEO and to a leader of a nation.
Mm.
And that research that you helped with was an eye-opener. And so as I kept exploring and digging and investigating, it just hit me. And I thought, holy moly, there is, and of course, then I started to look at what was happening in Australia with Australian politics, Australian leadership. And then all of a sudden I saw this global pattern of elevating a certain kind of leader.
Yep.
And discarding, because that's what's happening, discarding those leaders that don't fit the mold. And it was then the word that came to mind was groupthink.
Yep.
And lack of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
That then helped me realize, wow, we are facing all these global risks as a result of lack of cognitive diversity, which, as I was reviewing one of your brilliant research reports on team diversity and team performance, as you rightly pointed out, there is, first order, there is this superficial level of diversity that we've grown accustomed to.
Yeah.
But then there is a deeper level of diversity that we really should be looking at. And I've chosen to call it cognitive diversity because it kind of picks up everything. But, there is a lot more to be said, a lot more to be researched in that space.
Yeah, yeah. So what just for people who haven't read it, what we're talking about here is kind of surface level diversity, which is around skin color. The deeper levels are around about how people think, how they perceive things, how they interact with things. That there's a whole series of different levels of diversity that make more of a difference. And it's got nothing really to do with people's skin color. It's about what's going on in here and also in their heart. So
That's
yeah,
right. That's right.
interesting.
And you know, as a coach, and this is the beautiful thing about coaching psychology, it's this, you know, it's no longer an emerging discipline. It is a discipline that is starting to mature, and there's so much research happening all over the world. And I'm currently studying with Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck from,
Oh,
in fact, from Henley Business School in the
yep,
UK.
I know David.
And yeah,
Mm,
and you know, we're actually talking about the team processes that are necessary to ensure that you have the right kind of diversity that will lead to positive organizational results and
mm.
outcomes. And but part of that, David, and this is an essential part of it, we need STEM people in teams because they bring something different to the table.
Okay, and what's that?
Well, funny you should ask. In my book, on page 57, I call it the STEM leadership advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that we should get rid of other leaders and only have STEM leaders. That would be a technocracy, and that's not what we are recommending. We're saying that we want in the leadership circle, whether it be in government, academia, or the corporate sector, whether it's profit or non-for-profit, there is great benefit to be derived by having people from STEM backgrounds. And the reason for that, and you might want to then ask me, what does STEM stand for?
That was going to be my next question, so people know.
STEM is an acronym, and my STEM has two M's. So S is for science, T is for technology, E is for engineering. The first STEM is for mathematics, and the second M is for medical research or medicine. And of course, I'm a very inclusive person, so I thought, let's include the medical scientist as well.
Yeah. Yes. And just to be clear, this is not about replacing leaders with STEM leaders. It's about increasing the diversity of leadership within organizations to include them, because largely they tend not to end up in leadership positions. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's right. That's right. And something that I talk about in my book is I use case studies, and these are amalgams of many clients. But there are two particular individuals that I talk about throughout the book. But what the data shows, and when I say data, this is research from all over the world, the UN, particularly UNESCO, the Pew Research Centre, and many other organisations, is that people with a STEM background, that's not the only thing. It's also other personality traits that contribute to STEM individuals being left out of the decision-making conversation, right? And so characteristically, very analytical,
Mm.
and they have complex problem solving skills. And at this stage of humanity in the 21st century, and I talk about this extensively in my book, we being people who follow the World Economic Forum and Davos conversations, the chairman of the WEF has coined the term Fourth Industrial Revolution, and that's characterized by never seen before scientific and technological advances, never seen before. What is about to come is something that is going to redefine reality for all of us, not just most of us, all of us.
Yep.
And the research shows that our current leaders are not equipped to make decisions that are accurate or fast enough. Those two things, accuracy and speed.
Mm.
And you can see that. You can see that with the pandemic. You can see that with climate change.
Yep.
You know, and many other global risks that are mentioned in my book.
Mm. Yeah. We're seeing it in the UK a lot, and we're seeing, particularly with Industry 4.0, and just for people, what we're talking about is a group of technologies that are starting to become part of the decision-making apparatus. So we've got AI, machine learning, and a whole series of other robotics and things that are starting to enter into the workplace on a significant level that's starting to change the world of work. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about Industry 4.0. So we're seeing quite a number of examples in the UK, for example. There was a decision made by one of our MPs, the father of the house, to recall everybody in the middle of the epidemic to vote in person, whilst everybody's meant to be social distancing. Whilst before that, they were doing it virtually. And it's like there's this kind of anti-technology thinking that's going on. With a group of leaders who don't understand it and don't like it, and yet these technologies are having huge impact. In fact, I've just written yesterday a research briefing around AI and machine learning and the impact that it's starting to have on people's trust of decisions, because a lot of these algorithms are actually making decisions in the workplace. And if we have leaders that don't understand that and don't understand what's inside those things, we've got real problems, because they're not seeing some of the issues that are cropping up with it, and some of them are just blindly accepting it. Anyway, sorry.
But to add to that, David, and it's interesting that you call it Industry 4.0. And I think it's interesting how every country, they'll latch on to a different term. And over here, it's the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is the term that I've decided to use in my book. It's not just artificial intelligence and alternative and artificial reality. It's also genome editing. Now, I come from the pharmaceutical industry, from a medical research background, and I still work very heavily in that space. And what is happening in that world is mind-boggling, and our leaders don't understand it.
Yeah.
They don't understand what it means. Genome editing, they don't understand. They think, well, they just go by science fiction movies. That's their idea. That's how they conceptualize research. 3D printing. And again, they'll go by some current affairs show that they'll watch, and that's how they base their decisions. And there is a massive lag time when you have leaders around the table who don't have, I'm not talking about familiarity. I'm not talking about reading Scientific American or New Scientist. I'm talking about people who are trained in STEM, because there is a different aspect to the way that we view things. Okay, we are trained, it is innate in us. When I say innate, after many years of development, of course, and studying, it is innate. We think mathematically, we're trained to see patterns that maybe other fields may not see, say for example, lawyers may not see, which is what politicians, they usually come from that field. And so there is a massive disconnect at the moment. And the consequences are very serious, very, very serious, which I talk about extensively in my book. Consequences that have been highlighted by the United Nations in their global risks report for many years, and our leaders ignore that.
They are, and just from one of the areas that I've got interested in around, because I'm a psychologist, around the manipulation of minds and how certain political parties are actually using social media and things in order to manipulate the way people vote, the way people think, on a scale that we've never been able to do before. And we just look at the scandal over Cambridge Analytica. Now, people think that because Cambridge Analytica is no longer, that the problem's gone away. It hasn't. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is how politicians are viewing that issue around psychological manipulation. And the vast majority of them, they're not even on the starting blocks. So if we don't understand that, and that's just at one level of science, with genomics and a number of other ones, if you don't understand it, how do you actually engage in kind of social movement of changing things so that we're not being manipulated, that we're not getting into a situation where democracy is being hacked? And that's just at a political level. How do politicians and leaders make decisions if they don't understand the science? Because this science is not coming, it's here. And it's making a difference.
Well, the science has always been here. And it's always been here. And we've changed in the last 50 years and have elevated the salesman as leader.
Yes, that's a good observation.
Yeah. And no, this is there's a lot of studies by sociologists that I talk about in my book, and how, and again, and I, at the risk of sounding like I am being too harsh on the US, and let's keep in mind that I'm an American by birth. This really started in the United States, in the early 1900s, and after the Industrial Revolution, something very interesting started to happen in politics, and it was more about the capitalist mindset, and I'm not criticizing capitalism, because I think it is the system that we've all adapted to, and so it is really about being more balanced and not pursuing wealth at the expense of other stakeholders. And that's what I like about the term the fourth industrial revolution, and what we are now saying to leaders: hey, we have been pursuing this model of the shareholder value and always being the shareholder at the top. But that has really sacrificed other stakeholders. And the other stakeholders are the environment, and the underrepresented in society,
Mm-hmm.
and the animals and plants, and what we're observing with mass extinctions.
Mm.
And so we need a different narrative and a different way of interpreting capitalism. And what the book is about is making sure that we have other thoughts around the table. And scientists, and I can tell you this for myself, I'm both a physical scientist and a social scientist.
Mm.
And I was never trained to love wealth.
Mm.
My training was to pursue the truth, to look for the truth, to look
Yep.
for facts,
Mm.
right? And to love learning for the sake of learning.
Yes.
That really is how scientists are wired, whether you're a scientist or a physical scientist. But if you only put people in leadership who come from sales and marketing or economics, or dare I say law, you will just get groupthink. You will only get a one-track mind. You will only pursue certain goals,
Yep.
and not consider the rest of humanity.
Mm. Yeah, and the wider picture, because we live in an ecosystem, and if that ecosystem goes down, we go down with it. And anyway, yes, absolutely. So in the book, you talk about the science of leadership. So and science being an acronym. So what do you mean by that, and why is it important?
Yes. Being obviously a scientist in the soul, I wanted to come up with an acronym that would resonate with other scientists. There is nothing worse for a scientist to be given an acronym. We don't like acronyms. We think they're cheesy. And I remember when I started to do the MBA and everything was an acronym, this model, that model,
Yeah.
the whatever model. I really had to change my mindset and stop, laughing in lectures, thinking, what? This is ridiculous. We think in formulas and this law and that, we're trained to remember formulas and equations. And so I thought, well, what can I do to help build a bridge and also help my fellow scientists remember this? And I came up with science, and I thought, brilliant. And really, each letter represents a set of, it's a pillar, if you like, and under each pillar is an umbrella of different tools. So the S stands for self-development, self-knowledge development. It is quite an extensive framework, but the gist of it is that it basically gives you a very systematic approach to helping leaders. And in fact, this model applies to any leader, not just scientists. I just called it science, as I said, to appeal to my STEM colleagues, but it can apply to any leader who is transitioning from one level to another. So if you're going from supervisor to manager, manager to director, director to chief, operating officer, or vice president or president, you're really going through massive changes psychologically as well as cognitively.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And those transitions need to be managed. And sadly, what we do is we promote someone based on their technical competence. They're very good at, for example, an accountant, brilliant accountant, and then they get promoted to financial controller or CFO. And all of a sudden they are expected to lead, to inspire, to set a vision. They don't know how to do that. And so this model takes any leader through the steps to actually develop the skills and capabilities to be able to lead effectively.
Yeah. Great. Do you just want to talk us very quickly through what the acronym means? So we've got science. Yeah.
So S is self-knowledge development.
Yeah.
And that is really about knowing yourself. So we work with the client or the team, develop greater self-awareness.
Yeah.
And so understand their own personality traits, their strengths, values.
Yeah, and there's a lot of research evidence to support that this is a key attribute, this development of self-awareness, and it's the foundation for further development anyway. Sorry, carry on.
No, without that, you're just spinning the wheels.
Yeah.
So like you said, there is a lot that can be covered under that, and I talk about it in my book, and I also in the back section of the book there's a table where I actually provide the different models, and every model that I've used is evidence-based.
No, it's very good. So.
Yeah, the C is conceptualize mental complexity.
Good.
And a lot of people would say, what on earth is that?
Yep.
Well, that is the level of maturity. And again, there are some really nifty tests that we can use to help the client understand, right, I have a socialized mind, which is a follower, versus a self-authoring mind, which is sort of a middle leader, versus a self-transforming mind, which is a meta leader, somebody who leads because he or she wants to make a difference.
Yeah.
The I in science is investigate leadership style and capability. Now, I would imagine that your readers would know a great deal about the different leadership styles because you do some really reports in that space. And in my book, I talk about the leadership models that have been researched and the ones that you can actually say, okay, well, there is an organizational connection to outcomes.
Yeah.
And of course, being an executive coach, I've actually also captured a lot of work that we've done in coaching psychology, in conceptualizing essential leadership capabilities. But that really comes from coaching psychology. E is for emotional intelligence enhancement. And there are many models that are researched and evidence-based. One I like using is Daniel Goleman's.
Yep.
Because it's really approachable, really accessible. It's easy to understand. And that is self-explanatory. You know, we need to have emotional development emotional intelligence if we are to engage with others.
Yeah, definitely.
And I just want to make a point here that when I started writing this book, and I would attend a conference and talk to other coaches and other colleagues, and we start talking, what are you working on? And I would say, I'm writing a book on coaching, STEM leaders, and they would say, please do that. We need that desperately. And I say, why is that? And sadly, their description of the STEM individuals, regardless of what field, was far from favourable.
Yeah.
That really showed the stereotypes and the biases that exist already in society that we have to unlearn. And so when I talk about developing emotional intelligence, I'm not coming from a position of deficiency. I'm actually saying, you know what? Everyone, we all need to develop emotional intelligence.
Yeah,
because if scientists are behind, if scientists are being sort of left behind closed doors, so to speak,
Mm.
so that decisions get made by the leaders. There is something there in terms of reciprocal emotional.
Yep.
How about if those others who are maybe strongly extroverted make an effort to engage with a slightly more introverted scientist?
Yep. Yeah, and certainly from my own research area, which is around uncertainty, the areas of emotional intelligence and particularly emotion regulation skills have been shown time and time again to underpin people's ability to be able to deal, cope with uncertainty, shifting, fast changing situations and things like that. And the whole idea of emotion regulation, particularly, is frequently left out of the syllabus for leadership development, and it's a problem because it really does underpin people's ability to be able to deal with difficult situations, but also uncertainty as well. So yeah, I would just second that without a doubt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And there's some really good work that is coming out, from mindfulness work and
Yeah.
mindfulness research.
Mm.
I really like ACT, so acceptance and
Yeah.
commitment therapy, a whole umbrella of tools. And they've come up with psychological flexibility as a
Yeah.
term, which I find really, it's easy for my clients to understand. Um, and, and we cover emotional regulation in there.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you,
Yeah. Yeah.
David.
And the whole idea of cognitive flexibility is kind of a bit of a game changer in the narrative, particularly for coachees. So as they start to think about that and that idea of being able to be flexible here about the way they're perceiving things, understanding that it is a perception, and going back to this whole thing about cognitive diversity really, and the importance of cognitive diversity in decision making and within organizations. And quite often that's missed out. And as you say, groupthink, we end up with people being promoted because they fit the system,
That's right.
and it doesn't create that diversity. And certainly, again, going back to the research that I've been doing around dealing with uncertainty, that cognitive diversity is key. So the people, there's about 2% of the population who are really, really good with uncertainty. And what you find that they do when they approach a situation is the first thing they do is they say, I don't know what's going on here. And that's so important. Then what they do is they go about this data collection process from a huge diversity of people, and not just the people around them. They'll go to the cleaner, they'll go to people out on the street. They'll want to know how they're perceiving the world because it's valuable data. And then they start to work out what the patterns are, what they're seeing, what the emergent properties are from that point of view.
Yes.
What tends to happen before that, so the other 98%, is that they tend to look at a situation and make their decision about what's happening rather than collecting the data first from that diversity. So yeah, again, I kind of
Yeah.
second that. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. But what's really interesting about what you're just saying, David, if I can just
Mm,
connect then to other aspects of the model,
mm,
and that's why none of these concepts should stand on their own. All
yeah.
right. They are all interconnected, and it could be iterative. So it
Mm,
may look like sequential. The only one that should come first is self-knowledge development, and everything else really can be iterative and it
yeah.
can be met. But if I can just
Yes,
connect what
please.
you said to the conceptualized mental complexity, I have been looking at some brilliant research that is, and it's in early days, early stages, trying to connect the relationship between mental complexity, i.e., maturity, which comes from adult development theory, as you know,
Mm.
to cognitive flexibility, and then psychological flexibility,
Yeah.
right? So, what are the relationships between all of those? And it's
Oh,
really brilliant. It's really brilliant stuff. And so, when I sit with a
interesting.
client, yeah, when I sit with a client, I have, you know, like such a massive library of tools, and in the dialogue, in the narrative, coaches like myself, and I'll come to that, you know, a little bit later on about what that means.
Mm.
We're trained to not just, you know, listen and try to make everything positive and rah rah. No, we are that's linear thinking. We're thinking, okay, where is this client in his or her adult development trajectory? What is their level of mental complexity? Are they really equipped
Mm.
to have the level of cognitive flexibility required for this kind of leadership position?
Yeah.
Do they have the psycho flexibility, okay, to deal with the uncertainty that is now
Yep.
place in leadership everywhere?
Yep.
And sadly, the answer is no.
Mm.
In majority of cases, the answer is no.
Yep.
And so in the coaching programs that we work on, we are constantly looking at all those things and trying to conceptualize whether it's like a jigsaw puzzle. And so, and it's co-created. It's not being led by me. You know, it's the client and me.
Mm.
And so, and of course, it's also supplemented by maybe some skills training, etc., etc.
Yep.
So it's a very nuanced process and framework, which then brings me to the N in the acronym in science. N is for nurturing resilience and well-being.
Mm.
So it's all very well and good to know all of this stuff, but if you don't have the resources, the emotional resources, the mental resources, and the physical resources to undertake all of this,
Yep.
to flex when you're supposed to flex,
Yep.
then no matter how much you know, you'll just come unstuck.
Yep.
Um, so in that space in nurturing resilience and well-being, once upon a time, a lot of people used to say, "Oh, leaders, you know, that's what differentiates them." I would dare say that now everybody, you know, I disagree that leaders need to be more resilient. I'm a great believer that a leader is only as good as his or her followers.
Mm.
So
Well, I'd go one stage further actually, because certainly what's coming out of the research that we're reviewing is there's a huge shift in teams towards shared leadership. So,
absolutely,
you know, just because somebody hasn't got the title as leader in today's work world, there are going to be times when they're working on projects that they are going to be leading,
so true.
and and that, you know, having these capabilities and also having this diversity within the teams is being shown time and time and time again in studies to be critical to team success. So, yeah, carry on. Sorry, there's so
No,
much stuff.
no, but
Mm.
it is
Mm.
very very valuable what you're adding to the conversation,
Mm.
because I couldn't agree more. The way of the future, it's always been teams, the wisdom of teams, and one of the brilliant things about STEM leadership, the STEM leadership advantage,
Mm.
again from page 57, 58, is that we are accustomed to working in teams. We
Yep.
cannot do work on our own. Since I
Yep.
started working in the lab, it was always a team.
Mm-hmm.
My experiments would not work unless so and so had done this and this and this and that, and we're always sharing information openly.
Yep.
Openly, that's just how we're wired.
Mm.
So, um, There is definitely a lot of advantages to hiring STEM leaders for those senior positions,
Yes.
because they already bring along that mindset of collaboration.
Yeah, and developing STEM researchers into leaders as well, so that they're starting to think about becoming leaders. Because certainly because I work in the medical sciences division, and
Yeah,
people get involved in their research and they think about their research career. What they very rarely think about is also developing as managers and leaders. And that's becoming increasingly critical from that aspect, as well as organizations starting to engage more with STEM professionals, because they're bringing something to the table that's very, very valuable.
absolutely. And that brings me to the C
Yeah.
Of science, which is consolidate transition process. And you know that is a sort of like a placeholder for the leader to then stop for a moment and reassess their identity. Because when we are going through this transition, like you just pointed out, you're a researcher, and you know we really value that title of researcher, not because of ego, but because it is what we love doing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you get promoted to a position of leadership, and that title of researcher may get stripped of you. And that can really affect a lot of STEM leaders in ways that they don't talk about. But I certainly went through it myself. And so in coaching, obviously we draw significantly from psychology and from psychotherapy. And we then provide some interventions for the leader to then start to bring together those multiple identities and internalize those different identities, that it's okay to be a manager and also a scientist and also a researcher and also a leader, and maybe a business leader, and maybe a social leader. That it is okay, that it's not one or the other.
Yeah.
And
yeah. And it's also okay for there to be tensions between those things, and to recognize those tensions and just to allow them to be. Quite often what I find is both leaders and organizations rush to try to negate the tension. And sometimes that's a mistake. Just recognizing and allowing it to be for a while, to understand what the emergent properties of that are, and what it's doing, and which is kind of a consolidation piece itself. And quite often I find in organizations is they're moving so fast, they don't have time to consolidate. They don't sit back and say, right, okay, what does all this mean and where's it all going? And they miss a lot, particularly in times of change. They're not seeing those emergent properties. Yeah.
Absolutely right. And I'm glad that you pointed that out, because especially in that place of consolidating process, I provide a model that is derived from MBTC, which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and it is about training the brain to stop and observe. And you become an observer. And so if we go psychological flexibility, it is learning to hold yourself as an observer, not as just one identity and it's fixed, but rather you learn to stand back and just view it as it unfolds. And like you said, and I really like that that expression that you use, is about sitting with attention. I use that a lot in my coaching conversations with my clients. We talk about, and again, psychological flexibility. It is about actually turning towards the tension rather than avoiding it, because we are, particularly in the last 50 years or so, we've been trained to just reframe so quickly, and everything has to be positive, everything is great, everything, and we're supposed to just move on. Move on.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of unlearning that takes place in the coaching process, and
Seem to have frozen somewhere along the line.
with curiosity, and also with a lot of compassion.
Yes.
A lot of compassion.
Yeah, compassion for others and compassion for ourselves.
For the self.
Yeah.
And so then that brings me to the E on enable sustainable change. And that's where I actually introduced the SMART goals. So we identified the intentions and the basic direction, but the actual learning agenda can only come a little bit further down the track, mostly towards the end.
Yes. Yeah. Brilliant. Fantastic. Great. Thank you. So if you were to pull out just one main lesson, and this is a horrible thing to do to an author, I've had it done to me, so it's my turn to get my own back here. So if you were to pull out the one lesson that people could take away from the book, what would it be?
That we need to reconceptualize leadership.
Yeah. Okay.
That we need a different approach to developing our leaders.
Yeah.
And I had the audacity of proposing a way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's brilliant, and certainly bringing science into the boardroom, and that way of critical thinking, I think, is imperative, and it's certainly needed in a big time, and it's needed within organisations. It's needed politically, and it just comes back to how we kind of started all of this on the call, which is around having diversity within the boardroom. This isn't about replacing anybody. It's about increasing the diversity and bringing the skills of STEM scientists into the boardroom so that their skills and their capabilities can be used. And certainly from the research that's going on around leadership and organizational development and things like that, is it gives organizations a significant competitive advantage. And we're seeing this with kind of biotech organizations and things that do naturally have STEM leaders involved in their boardrooms and bring together with the more traditional leaders. They become very powerful conduits for the organization for moving it forward and moving it into new spaces, particularly in times of change. That's brilliant.
Absolutely. And I think that for me, I started out as a chemist. What I first thought was I was going to be an environmental chemist, and I gave a presentation to the business school on global warming, and I was laughed out of the lecture room. This is 1990. When I presented alternative energy sources, and they were just laughing, and I thought, well, I need to make a living, so there's no way I'm going to become an environmental chemist. And so I moved to the dark side and became a pharmaceutical chemist. And I say that lightly because I love the pharmaceutical industry. The real scientists that want to do good have really changed the world. I'm not talking about the marketing machine. I have no time. Well, I do have time for it. I just understand what drives it. And that, again, is talked about in the book in terms of that unbridled capitalism that has become so different in the last 50 years. It's less and less and less safety nets and less control and less regulation. Yeah. And so I really believe that it is high time, it is urgent, it is critical that we completely reevaluate and change completely how we are developing our leaders. It's a must. It's not a nice to. It's not a nice to do. Leadership matters. Leaders are so important, and we only have one planet. And whether we like it or not, we are affected by the decisions made by our leaders. And so we need more balance and more rational thinking at the key decision-making tables. And I'm not talking about, and I'm taking your point about, biotech companies that have, that are very successful and they have STEM leaders on the boards. That to me, and there's a lot of them around in Australia as well, particularly in IT, where I do a lot of work. I'm really talking about sort of the mammoth companies, the ones that are really influencing the world, and the ones that are driving the political agenda, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
That's where we really do need a different kind of leader.
Yeah.
And so once we start to see that, I dare say that we will start to de-risk what is currently threatening our planet. I have a child, you have children, and you asked me what drove me to write this book. And I was, I was being purely professional, but if I spoke to you as a multidimensional human being, and I've given these talks at UN meetings and conferences, what really, really drives me is the fact that I feel ashamed that we are leaving the world in the state that it is, that we're giving the world the way it is to the next generation.
Yeah.
My son comes from school and says, "Mom, how could your generation have done that?"
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree. We need to. Our generation have to take responsibility for what we're handing on to the next generation, and at the moment we're not. I personally, I think it's criminal.
It is criminal, and I had to really, my editor just kept taking stuff out of my book because he kept saying, "This is a business book. You want it to sell. You want the CEO to read it, not throw it out." But I was very tempted to use words like that, and I had to bite my tongue. But it just between you and I, David, it is criminal. It's immoral.
Yeah, yeah, I think so as well. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Ruby. This has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the book. I'll put the links to the book in the show notes. The book is Scientists in Every Boardroom, Harnessing the Power of STEM Leaders in Every Boardroom. Now, Ruby, if our members want to contact you, how can they do so?
Please feel free to do so. Just jump on my website, www.proveritas.com.au.
Yeah.
And if you want to email me, feel free to do so at rcampbell, all one word, at proveritas.com.au. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So I'll probably send you some slides that maybe you can include in the podcast if anybody wants to send me a note.
Yeah.
I would be delighted to hear from your audience, and I was actually thinking that if I am contacted, the first 5 people that contact me, I will send them a signed copy of my book.
Oh, cool. That's really nice. Thank you very much. So I'll put links to all of the ways to contact you, the social media and the website and everything in the show notes. And as you can see, Ruby's very open to these conversations, and the book's very, very good. Great. Thank you very much, Ruby. I really appreciate your time and for everything that you've given us during our conversation. Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed this
Brilliant.
interview. Thank you. Thank you
Great.
very much for your input.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye bye.